So, welcome to this episode of Crap No One Tells You. With me today is Laurel from Empirical Consulting Solutions. And she's going to tell us about some of the crap no one tells you about content marketing. So, welcome, Laurel.
Thank you. Very excited to be here. Lots that we can talk about on this subject.
So, let's just dive right in.
Okay.
What is some crap no one tells you about content marketing?
I think one of the biggest things that nobody realizes is that content is king. And some of you may have heard that phrase before, but it is absolutely true. You know, there are cliches out there. This one you need to pay heed to and really listen to. And content can come in so many different forms. It can be, written, it can be video, it can be audio. Those are just three of the basics. But from there, you can go into many, many different directions. But content is really what is the driving force, the engine of marketing. Without content, you can't market yourself well.
And hasn't that kind of been historically the case with most marketing? I mean, years ago, we called it like PR, right? The goal was to get in the newspaper. The goal was to get in on television, like get that 30-second clip on the news. Content distribution has just been made a lot easier today than it ever has been in the past, right?
Exactly. No, historically, you're exactly right. I mean, I think back to when I was a kid, my parents were PR professionals, and so they would actually mail out press releases. This is long before the days of the internet or email.
Like
stamp. In an envelope, yeah, in an envelope, glue a picture to a piece of paper. That is how old-fashioned it was. That was when I was a kid growing up in the 70s. That's what I saw. So that was that was content. They were actually fantastic distributors of content. And yes, over the years, things have changed and things continue to change at light speed. But with the advent of the internet and electronic communications, I mean, we've had this for decades now, but the need for more and more content is only growing, and people want it now, quickly. They want new stuff. They want innovation. So unfortunately, the bar has really been raised as time has gone on. So that makes anyone who is involved with marketing makes their job that much more difficult. They have to stay on top of it and again, figure out new innovative ways to come up with content.
People tend to forget the internet is only 25 years old, give or take, in the form that we know it today.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's still relatively a new distribution platform, and we're still seeing, different ways that is being used. I mean, I remember, 10 years ago, the first iPhone launched?
Right, exactly. It hasn't been that long ago
No,
at all.
it's a decade, right?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe a little longer than that. I'm trying to remember
Well,
exactly
we're on the
what it
iPhone
was.
13 that just got launched, right?
Yeah,
So
yep.
one a year would make it 13 years, give or take.
Exactly.
So you're talking a decade since people even, that was the first introduction to a device that could do a multitude of things other than just make phone calls, right?
Exactly.
We'd had the BlackBerry, which really was just voice and basic text, right?
Yep.
You could visit a couple of websites. It wasn't what mobile devices are today.
Exactly.
So where do you see the shift in content marketing happen? You've been in this for a while. So at what point, because I feel like we're shifting to that where quantity is almost as important as quality, right?
Yes.
You have to put out a certain amount just to be competitive, right?
Exactly.
Because everybody's putting out content. So
exactly.
Where should people look for that balance between quantity and quality?
It's a great question, and that is, I think, kind of the elephant in the room to a certain degree. People are almost afraid to say, okay, how do I come up with the right balance? Do I have enough? It's the conversations that marketers really need to have, and unfortunately, there's no right answer because things shift all the time. You and I have had conversations about algorithms and how, the content is going to be picked up by search engines. So how frequently does it need to go out there? Where does it need to go? What mechanisms? What tactics should we be using to be most effectively being found? And it's changing all of the time. But just going back to what you were saying about the iPhone. So let's just step back in time to that. So, it used to be if you were going to be searching for, information, you would have to be at a desktop or at a laptop. And, you'd have to kind of plan it out to sit in front of this type of device. And we're going back now 15, 20 years. Once the iPhone came about, you have that computer, that screen in front of you all of the time. And what are people doing? They are looking for content.
Yes.
Sometimes they know what they're looking for. Sometimes they don't know what they're looking for. So the content is always, we live and breathe content now. I mean, if it's possible to say content was king 20, 25 years ago, it's even more king now. You know, I don't know how to take it to the next level.
It always was, because we used to spend our nights watching whatever was on TV, right? You would watch Grey's Anatomy or whatever the show of the moment was, right?
Yep.
Now people are literally turning off the TV, picking up their phone and looking for content to replace that content.
Exactly.
So it's not that we are consuming more content, but we're also consuming different types of content because of access.
Exactly. So with the TV, for example, a great analogy, and I'll go into print as well. So with TV, you used to have to watch whatever was put on the station in front of you, and that's what you would watch and consume. Then we had our DVD players, and we could record something and watch it later, whether it was a sporting event or something. All of that has changed. You know, with streaming, my kids, I've got kids who are up to 20 years old. They've never watched a TV show in their life. That's just, they have no idea what it's like to sit through a TV show and watch commercials. That's not what they've done.
They'll watch a 10-minute YouTube video.
Exactly. And then, how we consume newspapers and magazines. We can look online for the specific article that we want. We don't have to, go through page by page. Now, there are some people who still enjoy that because you don't know what kind of content you're going to stumble upon. But for many, many people, it's now looking for specific content and searching online for it. So, it gets back to what we have many discussions about. How do we make sure the content that we create and that businesses create actually gets found? It's a great topic.
So that brings us to an interesting question is, now you're talking messaging and content development, right?
Yes.
Like, what do I put out there? I know I have to put stuff out there, right? There's no and if or buts.
Yep.
But now we get into that nitty gritty of, what?
Yep.
Like, what am I supposed to say? What's right for my business to say? What's right for me as a personal brand nowadays?
Yep. So this is one of my favorite topics as well, because it comes back to who is your audience? What does your audience want to hear? And to be quite blunt, they're going to be thinking, what's in it for me? I don't care about you and what your business has done. I don't care about your background, but how is your business or whatever messaging you have, how is that going to rock my world, change my world for the better, and really, transform where I am today into a better place? And that's, kind of getting back to the name of the show, what people don't tell you, the stuff that nobody tells you. This is what people forget. They forget that there's got to be a rhyme and a reason for the content, and your audience. We're all selfish. Don't waste my time with something that's not meaningful or is not impactful or interesting or whatever the case may be. Give me stuff that I want to see. So you've got to get into the mind of your audience in order to create the best content.
So there is a giant content creator out there. I think he's like number 1 or 2 on YouTube. And I was watching an interview with him, and he said something that always struck me was, would you subscribe to you? And I was like, like that
question.
totally changes, would I subscribe to me?
Yep.
Right? And when you have to answer that question, you may realize that no, like if you're spewing out facts and figures about your product or your service, how long as a user would you listen to that, right? And you're like, you got to do better. There's an old saying, statistics. No, wait, what is it? Stories sell and numbers.
I know what you're saying.
Tell, right?
Yeah, I think that's it. That's it, exactly.
So it always comes back to what can you do to create short stories? Like that's what I believe has made the successful creators or content developers so good at what they do, is that they have this ability to tell a story. And I'm not talking Walt Disney, Aladdin, whatever, they're Frozen.
Yep.
But there are stories within every product. There's stories within every service. And I think that's the difference between decent, good, and great creators.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah, no, the story, and it gets back to, there's certain things with content that you must have for it to be good. It's got to be authentic. It's got to be something that's sticky and resonates and stay with the audience. But it also, I think it exactly has to be what you said. It has to be a story. There has to be something that captures people emotionally. If you don't have a story, you don't have an emotional connection. So that's the other thing with content. Yes, there's going to be different types of content out there that, have very limited amounts of emotional content, but the best content has that emotional connection. So let's just think of an example too. Okay, the Super Bowl happens every year, and we always talk about those commercials, right? I mean,
it's an anticipated event.
Exactly. And if we think about the commercials over the years that people love, there's some sort of story, there's some sort of emotional connection. I always liked the Clydesdale, Budweiser ads. The ones with the horses. I'm a horse person, so that's what I would gravitate towards. But a lot of people like animals and so forth. But Budweiser and Anheuser-Busch really over the years had a way of coming up with different spins on how they would use their ads and how they would use the horses in those ads. I think those days might be long gone by now, but anyway, those are the types of things. If you look back over the decades, it's the story that captivates people and is most memorable.
And that brings up another interesting point: is a lot of people generate the content once, they distribute it once. How many companies create one commercial and air it once? Right? I think people they don't fully grasp that when you create a piece of content, whatever it is, that's not a tissue. Like, it's not a single use thing.
Right.
It's having the ability to create a piece of content and then being able to reuse it, right? It should be like commercials. If you create a great commercial, they will run commercials for months.
Yes.
Right? Sometimes they'll run commercials for years if they are really good.
Yes.
Right?
And nowadays they live on YouTube for a long time, and it'll be like, hey, check out this commercial and so forth. But no, it's a great point about content. And it gets back to the whole idea of multiple touches too with an audience. Something that many times people forget is that you have to reach an audience multiple times before the message starts to sink in even, and they start to recognize, a name with a message, or, a brand name, a company with what they do. But you need to have those multiple touches then to get somebody to take an action. It's crazy, but it takes the way that humans work and the way that we're wired, and researchers have shown this, and marketers, we all know it. We need to apply these standards and remember this as we go through our marketing tactics and our marketing execution, but we have to reach an audience multiple times. So with content, if we can think of a way to repurpose something and use it over and over again. So if a blog is developed, for example, well, you can make it an audio blog, a video blog as well. You can put it on social media. You can put it on a website. You can put it out via email. You can see if there's partners who will help broadcast it for you as well. So it gets out there in a multitude of ways. One of the most important things that needs to be done, but I think it's a challenge to remember to do that. Definitely a challenge to remember to do that.
Yeah, it's most creators or most companies, most businesses aren't creating what I call time-sensitive content, right? Like, if you are reporting on something, yes, it's only going to be highly relevant for a short amount of time, and then it goes into like the archives, right? Like, when we want to do research on it 10 years from now, we need those archives.
Yep.
But creating what's called evergreen content, right? That is relevant all the time. I think that's really one of the key focuses that, figure out how to make more of that and less time sensitive, because the evergreen is also more likely to be able to be distributed across multiple platforms, multiple ways, multiple, versions of it, so to speak.
Yes.
And the other thing that goes with that is you can say the same thing two different ways, right? So you can create something, whether it's a blog, a video. If you can find a different way to say the same thing, there's nothing wrong with putting it out there twice.
Absolutely.
Right? Two different stories, two different points of view. you're always going to reach a different audience with a different point of view, right?
Absolutely. Yes. Now, having the multiple ways to get a message out there is crucial. I'm going to go back to what you were saying, though, about evergreen content, because I think this is a really interesting topic as well. And there is a balance. I do think you need to have some things that are timely and time sensitive. You do need to have some evergreen content. Something that a lot of businesses don't do is have a pipeline of things that are ready to go. And then you're scrambling to get things done, so that evergreen content began to be so crucial. It was interesting, though, some of the businesses that I've seen ran into an issue with COVID, because many of their articles and their content was focused on COVID. Well, guess what's incredibly outdated now? From a year ago, 18 months ago, sometimes even 6 months ago. If there's a focus on a certain timely event, and at the time it seems like it's going to go on forever, but guess what? We're well beyond that now. So the businesses that are going to have the most success with content reaching their audiences and resonating will have a balance of their timely, time-sensitive type of content. Be prepared for that to be outdated, though, and not be able to be used
Correct.
in 6 months. And then evergreen, which 10 years from now can be the best of type of blog or video that you can repeat again, because it's those principles still are very applicable.
Yeah, I mean, Google anything. A lot of times you're seeing content that was written 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago that is still showing as top results. And that is more the evergreen type versus news type content.
Exactly.
So, shift gears completely. How did you end up doing this?
Doing marketing in general?
Yes. How did you get from parents of handwritten or mailed out articles to where you are today?
Yes. Well, actually, that is my start, and that's where I was like, this is super cool what my parents do. So my father was quite he was the author and really the front person, the spokesperson of my parents' business. They were entrepreneurs. They had a PR agency. I grew up in New York on Long Island way back in the 70s. And my mother was a photographer and a fantastic editor. She was the one who would always make sure the message was exactly on target. So they were absolutely my inspiration. And from the time that I was little, I was like, I want to be like my mom and dad. And it stuck. So, went down the path of trying to learn more about marketing. Of course, over the decades, there's been enormous changes with it. And my parents are still doing some of what they did back in the day, even though they should be retired and living a great life right now. They're living a great life and still doing work. But it's amazing how some things that happen early on in your life can stick with you and help guide you forever. So my parents are absolutely my inspiration.
So did you just go out on your own immediately? Or
No, I did not. So I went to college, went to grad school, focused on marketing and communications and strategy, which I think is also a very important part of marketing. You can't just market. You have to have a rhyme and a reason, and it's got to integrate with other elements of a business. So wound up working in the financial institution industry for a while. I worked at a bank, and then I worked in the oil and gas industry for almost a decade. Put my time in at Big Oil. I worked for Mobil Oil Corporation, which then became ExxonMobil.
Right.
And then I went out on my own. So it's been over 2 decades now that I've been doing my own thing. And basically, when I worked in big industry and worked in it was a Fortune 1 company at the time.
Correct.
The largest corporation in the world. What I learned is marketing is so essential for businesses of all sizes. I learned a tremendous amount, and what I wanted to do is take what I had learned and make it accessible to smaller businesses. And marketing can and should be something that businesses can access, through cost and through professionals. And so since then, I've gone out on my own and partnered with a lot of different people, because here we are talking about marketing, where you've got all these different elements, from website development to video production to content writing and
Correct.
so forth, events.
No one person can do all of it really well,
So
right?
what I love about my job is I get to work with myriad types of people and in different industries and in different expertise areas. So
that's pretty awesome. So one of the things you mentioned in that is strategy. And I want to get back to that, because I'm pretty sure over the last 2 years, 3 years ago, everybody had a strategy. 6 months later, nobody had a strategy, right? Like things changed drastically.
Yes.
And then a year and a half later, they had to change the strategy again. Like,
yes.
I think the last like 3 years have really tested the strategy portion for for companies,
Yes.
not just on the marketing front, but like in general.
Absolutely.
So what have been some of the things you've seen from like a strategy perspective? Like they went from this is strategy A, oh crap, now we have to come up with a COVID strategy.
Yes.
And now we have to come out with an exit COVID strategy, so to speak. So,
exactly. And be prepared for, COVID part B or C or
Right.
something new to come up as well. Exactly.
Monkeypox,
Exactly.
something else could come,
Something
right?
could come at any time. So yes, strategy is incredibly important. I'll just give a quick overview on how marketing fits into it. Marketing has to support the entire organization, and I would argue that it's one, perhaps the most important element of it, because you're not going to have customers, you're not going to have your stakeholders understanding what you're doing if you don't have good communication. So without communications, you don't have a business. What has happened is I think that businesses have realized you need to have a strategy, but you need to be prepared to change on a dime. And bigger organizations that have a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of stakeholders who want to have their hands, or want to be cooks in the kitchen, that's not going to fly anymore. You need to have an agile team who can look at the situation and make changes. Because, yes, we've learned that things are going to continue to happen. It's only going to progress into the future. We're going to continue to have to shift on a dime. So with content and with marketing in general, how things were delivered had to change dramatically. And one of the things that I saw firsthand is that sales organizations who are so much into face-to-face interaction, whether it's visiting,
the conventions, the going out, the door knocking, grinding pavement.
Exactly, going to client locations, that was shut down for months, and in some cases more than a year. So the sales teams and sales organizations all of a sudden didn't have their tools that readily accessible that they were so successful with over time. So there had to be a complete shift. So it was very interesting when COVID hit, because then these organizations were like, what do we do? And the best organizations, the smartest organizations didn't cut back their budgets. They just said, we want to shift our budgets.
Right.
We want to take them from where we had been doing, which we can't do anymore. Let's shift them somewhere else. And that's where we saw online marketing just explode. So with webinars, we had to think of new ways to reach the target audience. So we saw an explosion of webinars. And I think we've also seen a huge explosion in video. And we've talked about this as well. And video doesn't have to be the super slick produced, let's go to a high-end studio, let's get a high-end director. It can be done very professionally and very well on a much smaller budget than I think businesses have seen in the past. And that's exciting because, again, content now is more accessible than it ever has been before.
So just let's assume no one understands. What is a strategy when it comes to marketing?
So a strategy is going to be, in its simplest terms, a strategy is going to be helping a business or an organization that is at point A get to where it wants to be, point B. It's got goals, it's got basically elements that it wants to reach for. The strategy is going to be all the different pieces. It's marketing, but again, I always come back to marketing has to interrelate with other things.
Correct.
You can't just look at different functional
Like
areas in a
marketing
silo.
strategy goes parallel with other strategy, business strategy, and all that
Exactly,
stuff.
operations. So, for example, if you're upping the marketing of a company, then the sales team is going to hopefully be busier as well and having to deal with customers coming in. And then operationally, can the rest of the team fulfill the orders that are coming in and so forth. So it's all got to be aligned and so forth. But the strategy is going to be really the plan, the elements that are going to get the business from point A to point B. People will oftentimes then, think of tactics and the execution. Those are the elements that feed from the strategy.
Right.
So you've got to have the larger, the bigger level picture that then guides what elements of tactics a business uses. And so when we talk about, like website and digital marketing and SEO and pay-per-click and public relations or email marketing and all of those are the tactics that are then supporting the overall strategy. And there's a lot of work that goes into the strategy. Again, you've got to have a lot of different minds that come into the room. It's helpful to talk to customers to find out what it is that's working, what they like about your business, where they see, opportunities. And then again, a company, a business can get from point A to point B with the help of all those elements coming together.
So basically, you put together your strategy from I want to get from point A to point B. And then it's a matter of piecing together what elements do I need from where in order to accomplish that.
Right.
So that could be a combination of, let's say, I don't know, someone says, okay, in order to get from here to here, we should run AdWords. We should have email marketing. We should have this. This should be our cohesive message. This is the product we should be pushing. This is our best seller. This is our, like in grocery stores, milk, bread, and eggs.
Right.
Lost leaders were known as that for years, right? They knew that's why people came to the store. Then the strategy was, how do we get them to buy more?
Yep.
The execution was end racks.
Yes.
Little dollar items in the checkout lanes.
Yes.
Like a lot of that stuff didn't exist in the past. Spraying fresh baked bread smell into the atmosphere, even like down to the music that plays at the store, is then all part of the execution, not the strategy, correct?
Exactly. Yes, and the strategy, strategy is what oftentimes is in the background. People forget that it happens. The execution is the fun part. That's and then but there's
the doing, right?
Yes, exactly, the doing. But I will always say that there has to be a reason for doing any of those elements. And the best teams, the best organizations, the best marketers will think. Actually, they'll think two things. Number one is, why am I doing what I'm doing? What is it driving? Where does it tie in? Are there other elements it ties into to help drive a result? And then the other really important thing is measuring, testing, figuring out what's working. And with marketing, as with many other areas of business, if it's working, you got to know if it's working or not. So you have to have some measurements in place. If it's working, keep going with it, perhaps modify it to make it even work better for you. And if it's not working, figure out what's wrong, or don't be afraid to just cut it off altogether and move on to something else, which can be very hard to do.
Yes. It's that, well, I've put so much money into it. And you're like, yeah, but you can't keep throwing more money if it's not working. Like, if it's not working, it's not working.
Exactly.
Tweaking is a totally different animal, right? Like, because now we're getting into more of the advanced type stuff, like A/B testing, like being willing to. I remember I read an article years ago, back to they pump bread smell into grocery stores because when you smell fresh baked bread, you are more likely to purchase more because you get hungry, right? I forget how many different types of bread smell they tested. Like, it wasn't just a bread smell. It was different types of bread that they canned and sprayed through the store, and they would measure it based on what type of smell was it that triggered people to buy the most. And I'm like,
Amazing.
This is like, are we at the border of manipulation now? like, are we now, or are we just really getting really good at understanding human behavior and how, like, the senses play into it, right? Like, millions of dollars go into designing grocery stores. Millions of dollars go into figuring out that, yes, if you spray your produce with water, not only does it help preserve the produce, but people also find it more tempting to grab it.
It's more
right?
attractive.
Like,
It's
correct.
more attractive.
So it's it's one of those interesting things is, and I had someone ask me this once, is marketing nothing more than manipulation? And I'm like, that was my,
like, it kicks you in the gut.
Correct,
when you hear
right?
that.
And I'm like, I guess technically it is. I said, I prefer calling it understanding.
Yeah.
Understanding what drives someone to purchase something.
Yeah.
And then just set it up for them.
Exactly.
Right?
We all crave information. We all want information. Again, look at how we spend our time during the day, talking with people or researching, because we all want information. Good marketing is delivering the information that somebody wants to where it needs to go about whatever topic it needs to be about. So, delivery of information.
Delivery, yes. We just, I think we had this conversation, actually it might have been this morning, where everything is content, right? You go to a networking event, you speaking to someone, is content delivery,
Absolutely.
right? It's just a very personal content delivery system,
Yes.
one-on-one.
Yes.
So a lot of times, I think people forget that you are already a content machine. If you are in any type of sales or networking or small business, you're just not utilizing the scale.
Right. That's a good way of looking at it. I think you're exactly right.
Right?
Yes.
So I think for a lot of smaller business owners specifically is find the questions you answer multiple times a week or day, right? Because if one customer had the question, chances are someone else had it, right?
Many. Many did.
Correct.
Yes.
So
Yes.
why not answer that on scale, right?
Exactly.
And another thing that I think a lot of people forget is the internet is local, right? Google My Business doesn't show you listings 3,000 miles away.
It's not relevant to me at all.
Correct, right? So all of these delivery platforms, whether it's Google, Facebook, Instagram, whatever the delivery platform is on the internet, is getting better at tailoring what it is that you're looking for.
Yep.
But if you, as a business owner or a salesperson or whatever you are, don't have the content there to be presented to that person, well, it's never going to happen then, right? Like that
Exactly.
connection will never be made.
Exactly. No, and you're exactly right. The other thing too, I just wanted to interject as well, as we're talking about content, and you're right, when you go to a networking event, any type of interaction you have with anyone, you are a content machine, you are delivering content. Make sure that you're instilling at the right time the thought leadership that differentiates you. So content, we all need to generate content for our businesses, but we need to use it to differentiate ourselves and show, really how our business, our service, our product, whatever is different in addition. Otherwise, it becomes a lot of noise, and there's a lot of content out there, and it's hard to figure out, okay, which content to listen to. So in addition to some of the other things we were talking about, as far as like storytelling and making it memorable and emotional, having that emotional connection, let's also make sure that it differentiates.
I just want to add to that because, I've been in business for years, I've networked. I think sometimes people try to overcomplicate what makes them different, right? Like I remember the first time I had an HVAC guy come to my house and he handed me a business card and he wrote his cell number on the back. Not a 1-800 number, not a, here's call our office for emergencies. And he literally said, if there is a problem, call me directly on my cell phone and I will come check out the problem.
Brilliant.
Right? And I'm like,
Brilliant.
but there's like 100 people that work for your company. And he's like, no, I installed the system. I want to follow it through. Found out later that's actually part of the company policy is the tech is supposed to give out the cell phone number. They don't have to answer it 100% of the time, but like it was one of those things, it made them drastically different at the time because I had never experienced that from an HVAC company.
Absolutely. And probably even the handwriting that was part of it as well. There's that, wow, this guy is actually, I'm one of the only ones who's getting this.
Right.
So that's all part of it as well. And the emotion that you feel, the affinity you feel for that company and for that technician for caring about you. Wow, that's powerful.
And it's one of those, you and I both know a person that does their presentations and has a tendency of using really big words,
Yes.
right? And that's another thing that people often need to think about when they're generating any type of content, whether it's one-on-one, whether it's for video, audio, is bigger words don't always make you seem smarter.
Right.
Bigger words sometimes just complicate the message you're trying to get out, right?
Exactly.
Sometime, keep it simple.
Exactly.
It is really something you often should live by with content.
Yes.
Right?
You got to think about who your audience is. A funny story, I remember when I was in high school, I can't remember when USA Today, the newspaper, came out, but I believe it was in the 80s sometime. And I had an English teacher who was explaining, the different types of writing. And she was one who explained that like Rolling Stone has amazingly intricate articles and very good writing. And we were talking about USA Today, and she said they're writing to the 8th grade level so that the multitudes of people can pick up that paper, read it, and understand it. And I always thought about that, kind of, you have the juxtaposition of different publications who have different writing styles, but different, I guess, levels of intellect that they're writing towards. And, anyone can pick up a USA Today and understand it.
It's knowing your audience, right?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
What is it called? Modern Scientific. Was that
Right. Or Modern Scientist or something.
Yeah,
like
whatever
it.
it was. Like
Yeah.
I remember
Yeah.
picking that up in probably like the late 90s. And I opened that and I started reading and I'm like, is it me or like does none of this actually make sense,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
But you could tell there were definitely some articles in there that were written for a base level reader, a novice reader like myself. We were like, oh, this makes sense. And then when you learn something about the topic, they basically just, gave you the top 1% of the iceberg that is visible from everywhere.
Exactly.
But a lot of the other articles were more the underneath the surface, like in depth, using concepts that I at the time had never even heard of. Like I've never felt as lost reading a magazine in my life.
Yep.
Right?
But it's a target, it's targeting your audience. It's not, what they're doing well is not trying to be everything to everybody, not trying to be all things to all people.
Right.
And, USA Today obviously is, or to where, they want to be accessible by everybody. But other publications and outlets and so forth, they're targeting more. And that's what businesses need to do.
Which brings me to kind of my last point before we wrap this up is I see a ton of entrepreneurs and startups and we ask them, I'll have a conversation with them and I go, okay, so who are you targeting? Everyone.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Big mistake. Yep, exactly.
right? You need to define, it's never everyone.
No,
right?
it
Like
is.
it's always someone. In fact, it's a very specific someone.
Exactly.
So kind of to wrap this up, if someone was starting their business, what would be their first steps in defining who am I going to sell this to?
It comes back to research. I would say it's understanding the market you're going after, understanding the competitors, the competitive landscape, understanding, even environmental conditions of what's going to change over time. You have a certain idea of what's going on right now at this stage. Where are the needs going to be in the future? Entrepreneurs really need to make sure that they do their homework. Otherwise, they're producing something that nobody needs or they're not targeting the right person. And this is actually where strategy comes into place. Many business owners and many entrepreneurs, I should say, who are starting up their own businesses don't have that strategy in place and don't look across all the different functional areas to make sure it all comes together. But this is where I'm a huge, huge fan of data, a huge fan of research. Understanding again who you think your audience is and what they really want out of your product or service. Once you get a grasp of that, you might change who it is that you're going after and who your target is. The other thing with entrepreneurs is start small, test it, and then expand from there. You don't want to make the mistake of going too big too fast. A lot of businesses fail in that way. So start small in a calculated, strategic way, test, and talk to others. Talk to other people who have been there, done that.
That have been in your industry and
Exactly. Whether it's entrepreneurs in another industry or those who are in your industry who can shed some light. I guess I can't overstate the need to do research and do background, do your due diligence.
Right.
Yes.
Should be part of your business plan if you
Yes.
did that portion correctly.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. This was so much fun.
I'm
Love
sure,
the conversation.
Sure, we'll have you on again and we can talk about some of these more niche type topics
Sounds
within
great.
marketing. So thanks everyone for listening.